Here's another clip from 1962, The Miracle Worker. And this is now we're getting into how Anne Sullivan taught Helen Keller how to speak. And the language you're going to see here that she's using is called the manual alphabet. So it's basically like there's a hand shape for each letter.
I taught her one thing. No, don't do this, don't do that.
That's more than all of us could do in all the years.
I wanted to teach her what language is. I know without it to do nothing but obey is no gift. Obedience without understanding is a blindness too. Is that all I've wished on her? I wanted to teach you. Oh, everything the earth is full of, Helen. Everything on it, it's ours for a wink and it's gone. And what we are on it. The light we bring to it and leave behind in words. Well, you can see 5,000 years back in the light of words. Everything we feel, think, know, and share in words. So not a soul is in darkness, or done with even in the grave. How do I tell you that this means a word, and the word means this thing, whoa.
Wow.
So that
yikes.
That scene is pretty close to the how it's described in Helen's autobiography, her first of two autobiographies. And at that moment, so water is the first time she realizes that these strange symbols that Anne's putting into her hand are letters that build words that refer to real things in reality. And it's that moment with water, and that's where she writes in her autobiography, she says, "That living word awakened my soul, gave it light, hope, joy, set it free. There were barriers still, but barriers that could be in time swept away. Everything now had a name, and each name gave birth to a new thought. I saw everything with the strange new sight that had come to me." And then one of these dolls that she had smashed earlier in the day, when she was trying to teach her the word for doll, she came back and she found the doll smashed on the ground. So she learned 30 words that day in her first day. And that's what you see in the clip where she's learning about tree and she's learning about these other things. Yeah. And then she came back and found this doll that she'd smashed, and her eyes filled with tears. And she said, quote, "For the first time I felt repentance and sorrow." And so it's like, it's hard for me to get my head around, this is like a 7-year-old. This is so many years after kids are developing their relationships and developing their understandings of things and dealing with all the different emotions. And up until this point, she's mostly only just felt anger and fear and hasn't been able to develop any of these other things. And then words unlock this whole human experience for her. And it's wild. And she says, "It would have been difficult to find a happier child than I was at the end of that eventful day. For the first time in my life, I longed for a new day to come."
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. She has this new awakening, a reckoning, and realizes that she's on the precipice of this like bounty of all of these new words and items and people and things that has escaped her for what, 7 years you said? So she's 7 at this point, or 10?
Yeah, she's
7. To even just like to have the mind open in that's an epiphany, but it sounds like a huge epiphany, one that most of us will never be able to imagine, because we're doing that in a much slower process, from birth to, every little experience with our parents and onward. At 7, that's insane. It's a crazy story.
I don't really remember as a kid like those moments of like having a word unlock something for me and being like, that like, and now I have this tool and now I can ask for this thing, you know, instead of just crying, or like too young to remember that feeling. But as an adult, or like one as a teenager and one as an adult, I can think of two words that made my life better. Like it just allowed me to recognize something. And the first one I remember was indifference. You know, and I remember like learning the concept of indifference as being like a terrible thing, and as being just as responsible for evil in the world as the evil deeds themselves. And it just like as like something to avoid, as something to never be indifferent. I just remember that word having a lot of power for me, and it still does.
Yeah.
And then one, as I became later, which like gave me a lot of freedom, was FOMO. When I found out about the word FOMO.
Fear of missing out?
Yeah, like I think up until finding out about the word FOMO, I would be a difficult person to hang out with one-on-one on a Friday night. Like I think, you know, like I think part of me would have just been twitching a little bit, like, you know, I'm sure there's something really cool going on somewhere, like, oh, you know, let's figure out where the party's at, like, and finding out that there's this term FOMO, fear of missing out, it's not a good thing, and other people are experiencing it too, and it's really, you know, has a negative effect on kind of your relationships and the quality of the time that you're spending where you're at right now. Right. Just like knowing it existed allowed me just immediately to kind of like get rid of it.
You know what's crazy? So in order to learn it and get rid of it, what it also takes me is, so can you imagine being a young transgender person in the 30s of America, you know? And there's no language, there's no vernacular to understand the feelings that are going on in your body and in your mind. And if anything, it's being subordinated. You're being told that something potentially is wrong with you, right? And then you have this awakening that is still happening. We don't have this awakening yet, but I mean to say that the conversation around gender is so different today. We have language. We have like so many different lists of genders. As people are attempting to understand the phenomena of gender and sexuality, it's completely different. You're different. And I'm not a transgender person, so I don't want to speak for the community, but I want to say, I can say that's something that, like, I don't know, if you're someone in different stages of privilege, certain words, this kind of new language isn't something you're seeking, you know what I mean, in the same way. So yeah. you know the world, the stories, the narratives all validate stuff that you know, and you don't have this thing that you have to, like, what is that even, how can I articulate this? And I don't know, the transgender conversation to me exemplifies new words, new language, and just changing the entire complexity of the conversation and giving people a voice, giving people the opportunity to be heard and to be empathized with. I say even on the other end, those people who you know, to be able to understand better with these words. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's got to be hard for people like who have an identity that's not necessarily understood broadly by the mainstream, because when they get interrogated on their identity, it's got to be hard to differentiate between those that are coming at it from a place of love and curiosity, I'll call it, like of like trying to understand your reality, trying to understand what your situation is, what your identity means to you, and what it means, how I should operate around you, like differently or something like this, you know, versus somebody who's coming at it from a desire to put you down or you know, cast shade on your group as a whole or whatever it might be, when they come at you with questions. And like in terms of so trying to differentiate, trying to figure out people's motivations got to be tough. Like
you're someone who's a polyglot. You speak several languages, at least three, pretty damn fluently.
Three.
Like, so the idea of like incorporating new words, you know, like I know if I go, my first language is French, but I've since lost a lot of it, and I go back to Guadeloupe and I have something I want to ask my aunt, and that's struggling, and then you get it and you have this, oh yes, you know, and now you're able to communicate that. Like you have that, you're familiar with that.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's fascinating to find a word in another language that just works better for you for whatever reason than the word you have in your your first language or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So like I think about in Spanish, like one of my favorite words in Spanish is desahogarse, which is the equivalent of in English we talk about to vent, right? So venting, like when you like me and you, when we're talking, when we're pissed off about something, and we come and we just dump on the other person like all this shit that you're thinking about and what some shitty person did today or whatever it might be. And venting is something where, you know, it's like you're getting out the hot air or whatever, but like venting is something you could just do, in theory, you could just do it all day to everybody all the time. You could just vent as a verb, as a metaphor, right? Whereas desahogarse, ahogar is to drown, desahogar is to undrown, desahogarse makes it reflexive, so it's undrown yourself. Now, I don't, like, I've talked to a lot of Spanish speakers about this, and I think it's not like when they use it, they think of the metaphor every time. You know what I mean? Like, I think they use it in the same way that we use vent. You know, we don't think about the metaphor. But I think about the metaphor because it's not my first language. So, like, when I learned that, I was like, that is such a cool metaphor. So it's like, instead of just venting, whatever, blah, 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 it's like you can't breathe, you're drowning. Like, you know what I mean? You've got this water in your lungs, and then you go and you spit up onto the table all that shit that was stopping you from breathing. And,
fantastic.
You know, there's like all this salt water in a bag of Doritos and a boot or whatever the hell you swallowed. And like, and then the other person goes, damn, you had a lot of stuff in there. Like, you had a lot of, I can't believe you had a Doritos bag in there. And then just that allows you to breathe now. Yeah. And the power of the word for me is that you do it once. You should only have to do it once, unless it's something terrible. You know what I mean? It's like, unless it's something that's really affecting your life, it's like, for the smaller things, it's like, do it once, feel better. Yeah. You know, like, breathe again, you know, and move on. Yeah. Whereas venting,
there's something
do all day.
Implied in it is a cathartic thing and a psychological, there's a health benefit implied in it.